Morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
There's Ken. All right, well, looks like everybody's here. Good morning and welcome. We'll go ahead and call to order the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal informal session for December 16th, 2021. And Ken, would you lead us in the pledge?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you for that. And we've got a special recognition this morning. Every year we do the employee years of service recognition. And we have some people who have been with us for a number of years, and we're very grateful for their service, and they will be recognized today. So Commissioner Kula, would you like to start with the 5-year awardees?
I would be honored to. Today, we recognize 5-year awardees. In admin, we have Jennifer Elkins in finance. We have Shane Hoffman in IT. We have McKaylee Moreno in HR. And in the assessor's office, we have Jordan Akins, Roxanne Henderson, and John Hockman. In community justice, we have Marcus Gomez and Cameron Weiler. In the district attorney's office, we have Rose Marie Camacho, Benjamin Donner, Stephanie Harmon, and Ava Ponche. In HHS and Health and Human Services, we have Stephanie Arcega Avendano. We have Amanda Baldoni. We have Patty Carter, Jill Dale, Shelley Davis, Robin Geiger, Bethany Gould, Cody Heimeyer, Jessica Cam, Kimberly Kinnian, Lindsay Lopez, Catherine Messner, Jennifer Pedersen, Maria Phillips, Sarah Ramirez, Melinda Richards, Karen Seagoblin, Betsy Wygant, Cheryl Wilcox, Austin Wellner, and Alicia Totemeyer. And in planning, we have Stephanie Curran and Lance Woods. The list goes on. This is amazing, these 5 years with us, folks. Thank you. In Public Works, we have Cody Reed. And in the Sheriff's Office, we have Samuel Elliott and Emily Williams. So congratulations to all of you, and thank you so much.
It's amazing because I'm looking at some of these names and it doesn't seem possible that it's been 5 years, but wait till you see the 45-year Employee Service Awards. It's pretty impressive.
It's amazing.
It's pretty amazing. Commissioner Berschauer has a throat issue, so she has asked me to read the names, and I'm happy to read the very first name because this is somebody that I see in the morning, and he always brightens my day. His name is Juvenal, and I've reminded him that name has very special, very long historical significance, which he didn't know about, so I shared that. So Juvi, as we know, Acevedo is with us for 10 years. Christopher Howard, maintenance, 10 years. Dan Nelson, IT, 10 years. In the DEA's office, Lizette Lara. In HHS, Cara DeMarco, Greg Geisbrecht, Chen Tony Lai, Elsa Pantoya, Glenna Vorez. In the Sheriff's Office, Will Lash, and this is 10 years. And we also have the 15-year awards. We say thank you to Susie Sutton in the Clerk's Office. In Community Justice, Joshua Gordon. Thank you, Timothy Overton, for 15 years of service. In HHS, Callie Gamble, thank you. I've worked with Callie in the past, appreciate her work. Graham Haffley, Shannon Spence. In the Planning Department, Alicia Lyle. In the Sheriff's Office, Sheriff's Deputy Timothy Casey, and Madeline Knutz, and Philip Shadden. Now on to the 20-year awards. In the Sheriff's Office, Carol Ann Harlan and Todd Whitlow. The 25-year awards in Community Justice, Jacqueline Lee, Scott Posh. In Public Works, John Reed. The Sheriff's Office, Roy Harrell and Tamara Hart. The 30-year awards in the Assessor's Office, Thank you to Susan DeBolt and Eileen Slater. Sorry, Slatter. And also in HHS, Tommy Palin. For the 40-year awards in community justice, Dana Corelli, and Dana's touched a lot of people's lives. So thanks, Dana. The 45-year awards, Bill Anderson. That's amazing. 45 years. Congratulations, Bill. The following retirements, we are sad to see these people leave. Roy Panchow, 50 years. He retired from Public Works. Russ Van Wettering, 31 years from the Sheriff's Office. Gail Jensen, 30 years from the Clerk's Office. And our Carrie Hinton went over to fill that position, but Gail's still there, and I don't think they're ever going to let her go. Jason Mosman for 29 years, the Sheriff's Office. Tammy Runyon in the Sheriff's Office, 25 years. Jeff Donahue, 24 years in the Sheriff's Office. Annette Fernandez Madrid, 24 years in HHS. Mark Rogers, 21 years in administration IT. Steve Kindle, 20 years in Public Works. Tina McNeil, 13 years in the Sheriff's Office, and Todd Sadlow, 13 years with County Council. So thank you all for your service. And these are valued employees that we're glad have been here this long and hope they will stick around because we appreciate their service. So thank you to all of you. Thank you. And thank you, Carolina, for getting that all put together for us. We'll move on to public comment, or rather the calendar session. Is there anything to add to the joint calendar session, to the joint calendar?
Not that I'm aware of, Chair.
Ken, you have a change on the 30th, correct?
Two things. The first one I wanted to quickly ask about is because I know there was a notice that went out from AOC for a board of directors meeting tomorrow, and I wasn't sure if we needed to put that on the calendar for tomorrow, if any of you were planning on attending that.
No. We do have
No.
the ASA meeting that we'll be doing tomorrow. I know Commissioner Bershauer will be on that one at least. That one starts at 11, I believe.
And I'm hoping to
I think
attend
it's
as well,
at noon.
Chair.
Okay.
Starts at
Thank you.
noon on Friday.
Yeah.
Is it noon?
Noon. Mhm.
Oh, okay. Yep, it is noon. Thank you.
And then the second part that I was going to ask is I sent the commissioners an email with a question around December 30th on whether or not the board still wanted to have formal session for that week.
I know in the past, we've used this as an opportunity for staff to get some much needed time away from here. So I would be in agreement that we should probably forego the 30th if that's at all possible.
That's fine with me, Chair.
And that works for me, Chair, as well. I've been encouraging Ken and Christian to get things into next week's meeting. So
So
All right.
I'll work with department heads and anything that requires board consideration before the end of this calendar year. We'll try to, which will probably mean that next week will be a very busy agenda potentially. So I'll work with department heads, and next Thursday will be our last formal session for the calendar year.
Okay, sounds good. We'll go ahead and move on to public comment. We've received public comments via email. Thank you, Carolina. Our work session is item F, which is the review of the discretionary allocation for the 22-23 budget instructions. And Ken, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that with us this morning.
All right. Well, good morning and welcome. It's not only the holiday season, but this is also the kickoff of, for my office, the 6 months ahead of us as far as budget adoption process for the next fiscal year. As has been done each year, the first step in starting to build budgets for the fiscal year 22-23 is the scheduling of this work session to go over both the discretionary allocation table to set that base amount, and also a review and approval of the budget instructions, which then would be distributed to department heads in the first week in January to start building their budgets. So the first thing, I'm going to share screen. I figured we could start with the discretionary allocation. Okay. So can everyone see did I grab the right discretionary allocation table?
It looks like it, Chair.
Okay.
It's tiny, but we can
Yes,
see.
it's really small, Ken. I don't know about you, but I've got old eyes.
So how about I increase the size? Does that look a little bit better?
Thank you. Yes, much better.
All
Yeah,
right.
and don't make Commissioner Bershauer have to say anything.
All right. It's hard because I can't really see what you're seeing, and I know it's supposed to highlight my screen, but I think the fact that I'm colorblind, I struggle at times seeing the highlight to make sure that I pulled up the correct document. So
It's green and yellow.
all
I'll
right.
tell you that.
So what I have, so as part of the discretionary allocation, and this is to enable departments to give them some baseline to where to start building their budgets. And the first thing that we do is we do an annual review of the discretionary allocation table. Some of this can be a bit of a challenge because we haven't really started building budgets for next year. So to really get into the specifics about potential needs within the departments, there's still some unknowns because we're only midway through the current budget year. So projecting ending balances and determining revenues for the next year and looking at expenses, we really don't start doing that, those number crunches until January, February, to start pulling those numbers. That being said, with a review of previous budgets and knowing the requests that we've had brought forward, and then also just looking at the current economic situation right now, we are seeing increases in not just personnel costs, but insurance renewals, materials and services, contracting rates. We're seeing that across the board. And in an effort to streamline and ensure departments have at least some increase in the discretionary revenue to start building those baseline budgets, and to hopefully reduce when we get into May in the budget committee that we end up with 20 or 30 general fund requests. You know, we try to anticipate some of those needs and provide a recommendation for increasing that baseline. And then once departments start building their budgets, and then if there are needs or service areas or revenue concerns, they would then at that time come and make those requests to the budget committee. Now, in anticipation with the current situation and what we're seeing in rising costs and things, I am recommending that we do a 6% increase for most of the departments to boost that baseline. There are departments that I'm recommending less than that, and it's for a combination of factors. You'll see specifically the sheriff's office, the assessor's office, the DA's office. There are several offices that I'm recommending less than the 6%. And that's largely because what we've seen in previous years, a lot of those offices have had really significant large requests that were approved. And, you know, so this is a means to kind of get some of the smaller departments and some of the other areas their discretionary increase to build some more equity or get them caught up in some of these areas. And we're also did a quick review of some of the beginning balances and what we saw for the audited beginning balances for the current fiscal year. And so I think that's going to require some further analysis on, you know, if there is need in those offices to do a deeper dive during the budgeting process, budget development process, and really identify what those specific needs are. I'm also taking a look at, you know, the amount that I'm recommending Again, overall with the increases, and there's several departments that I've said, I think we can hold flat, and we will address that during the budget process. There's just a couple of those that we held flat. So altogether, this represents an increase of $1.1 million of the discretionary, for a total discretionary allocation of $30,580,526. And again, that's the baseline that includes the property taxes and all the lesser taxes in our projections to distribute out to departments to begin building their budgets. That being said, the amount, in looking at the numbers, I do have some concerns specifically around, I did a 5-year projection, and looking at that, essentially where this additional sorry, I just closed that screen. The additional 1.1 million is essentially coming out of the beginning balance that we have in 10002. And so we've had some savings over the years to where the beginning balance in 10002. Concern is, any beginning balances are usually due to a one-time cost savings or a one-time that revenues came in higher than projected. And it's not recurring revenue. So once we start to spend that down, once it's spent, and then we're back to those recurring revenues. So in looking at, I did a 5-year projection, and looking out, this amount actually puts us in a good position that if we were to maintain this discretionary allocation at this amount, for the next 5 years, we would be spending down that beginning balance and then also keeping pace with projected increases in our revenues. Now, one of the concerns that I have is when we do the projections, if you look at property taxes in particular, we've seen increases, each year of right around 3 to 4% each year. We've seen that climb up. I'm anticipating that at some point we're going to have some plateaus, or that's going to even out. And so taking a very conservative approach and looking at this, I feel confident that this amount puts us in a good setting for the next 5 years, that with this discretionary amount, we're not going to end up in a situation to where we're going to have to look at cuts moving forward. With this distribution, it is still going to leave as an ending balance of right around 4.4, almost 4.5 million as an ending balance. And then that will be available that through the budget process, if there's shortfalls, add back requests, or specific project areas where the board would like to apply some additional discretionary resources to, you have those resources. But then also keep in mind that the more we distribute out, the more we're going to be getting into that beginning balance amount. And then in future years, we may have to start looking at cuts or reductions to ensure that we're keeping pace with our revenues. Any questions on anything that I've covered so far on the discretionary allocation table?
Ken, I have a question, and how does the revenue replacement ARPA money factor into some of this?
That's a great question. I'm gonna stop share here. So at this point, where we have the ARPA funds, we have that set up in a separate special revenue fund. And as part of the budget process, because we did identify during previous work sessions, 3.1 million that falls under the public health response for kind of looking at more internal operations and services and projects, possibly one-time projects. And then an additional 2.9 million for possible revenue replacement that could also, and that would be the one that would potentially get factored into this. It's not included in this table or in those calculations because it's in a separate fund, and this really just builds the baseline. So once we get into the budget adoption process, there'll be several elements where I'll be looking at possibly doing transfers for revenue replacement, as an example, to specific departments that were identified or have been identified as having revenue impacts that occurred during the last year and a half. So we could also do specific transfers in those cases, but then we can also, just based on the GFOA revenue replacement calculator is what we use for reporting to US Treasury on potential revenue impacts. Based on that formula, I determined that we had a $3.2 million impact, potential revenue impact as a result of the pandemic. So based on that calculation, technically we could take a portion of those ARPA funds and transfer it into 1002 as a revenue replacement. I would, my recommendation is when we get into the budget adoption process that we do a combination of the two, because I do think that there are specific departments that we know. I'm thinking like the fairgrounds, HHS, parks. There's some of those service area that they weren't generating revenues as a result of not having a fair or not having the horse shows. The fairground's an easy one, and be able to identify exact dollar amounts to transfer into those funds from the ARPA funds. Again, fairgrounds is not a general fund budget, so they're not built into the discretionary allocation table at this point. Hopefully I answered your question.
Yes, and thank you.
Chair.
Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you. Ken, this looks great. Thank you for leading us through it. And thank you for looking at which departments, careful look at which departments you felt like needed that 6% versus a smaller allocation. I'm glad you were willing and could find the funds to put a 3% in some of these that have had bigger ones in the past. So this all tracks for me with what I expected, and I'm glad to see it.
Okay, any other questions, comments, Ken?
All right, so what I'm going to do, if there's no further questions about the discretionary allocation table, I'm going to switch gears and talk about budget instructions. And I was able to send out a memorandum that talks about the discretionary allocations, and then also what the budget instructions will be looking like. The budget instructions are not much of a change from the prior years. These instructions, we provide specific guidance. Again, departments have to enter in balanced budgets on their initial budget. We have guidance on any new positions or reclassifications and the process that departments are supposed to go through for building those into their budgets or how to make requests. We also have instructions for any department that is needing to make an add back request or make a new request related to either a service area, a new position, or they're just finding that they are unable to, they're having to make service cuts or program area cuts. And so they'd be coming to the budget committee asking for additional resources in order to restore the whatever cuts that they made in the budget and justification for that. It also provides instructions for how to budget for any transfers. So all of that information is, I don't believe it's new. There's not a lot of new items that are built into this. Probably the biggest highlight that is going to be new in here, and something I'll be talking to department heads, is this is anticipated to be our final year using the current finance system for building our budgets, because we have the Oracle Cloud project that is currently underway. There'll be elements of that software that will be going live in the next year, but it's not ready for doing budgets at this point. But this will be our last year using GEMS, and then next year we'll have a new system, and we're anticipating that'll probably prompt some changes in process and budget instructions and what departments are entering. So I know my budget team's really excited to when we get the new system into place. And then probably the most important part with the budget instructions are all the various standard cost tables, the countywide charges, the internal charges, everything that departments need to build their initial budgets. to then submit to my team to do our review and our magic and putting the total budget together. Also, within the budget instructions is the budget calendar for the year. So much like we have done over the last two budget adoption processes, we're still looking at the only time that we're going to get together and meet is with the budget committee. We're again not doing the April. Years ago, there used to be a board review prior to the budget committee review. And just with the uncertainty of whether or not we're going to be doing that in person or virtual and navigating that, I'm still recommending, it's not required in the per Oregon budget law. That was an additional step that is not necessarily required. And so my team will be meeting with all the departments and going through the budgets in the latter half of February and into March, and then we'll be getting everything ready for the budget committee in May. Any questions about the budget instructions? I want to make sure I'm not going over things that you might not have questions, or I'm not missing something that you do have specific questions about.
I have no questions. Thank you.
No,
Anyone
thank
else?
you very much.
Okay.
No, this is great. And I think it's a good tool for us to have before going into our strategic planning session too in January, just to have some context for what we're looking at going forward. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Great. And so that's what we have, and we don't have it as a specific agenda item. But the one action I would be requesting today is the board take, action on this. And I don't know if we want to just hold off and have that as an agenda item under other business, or if we can take, action right now.
Christian, is this something we could do if we made a motion to, at this point, since it's a work session item, or would have to be added to the actual other business portion of the agenda?
The board could take action now if you're ready.
Okay. So Ken, what kind of a motion are we looking at in terms of just accepting the discretionary allocation for the 22-23 budget?
I think it would be a motion could be approval of setting initial 22-23 fiscal year discretionary allocation for departments and approving the 2022-2023 fiscal year budget instructions.
I would move we approve that.
Thank
We're
you.
just nodding our head.
We're all
I
going,
could tell
yeah.
that Commissioner Bershauer was going to say the same thing.
Yeah, that's a mouthful for me.
What he said. Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have a second? Further discussion? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. What would we call that? Item F1C? Okay. All right. Thank you for that, Ken. We appreciate it. All right, we'll move on to department updates. We have none. Our consent agenda. Do we have a motion to approve?
I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented, Chair.
Okay, motion to approve. Further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes. On to item I, old business. This is consideration of the adoption of written findings and conditions in the matter of upholding the planning director's approval of planning docket RDI 23-21, which is the approval of a replacement dwelling at 11940 Southeast Boyer Road, McMinnville, the applicant Ronald Martin and the appellant Barbara Boyer. Do we have a motion to approve the findings? Christian?
Yeah, Madam Chair, we'd ask that this item be set over for one additional week. The findings are not yet completed, but we expect to have them ready for consideration by the board at next week's session.
Okay. So we'll go ahead and move that over to the 23rd.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. On to J, item J, other business. Consideration of approval of the intergovernmental agreement number 173153 between Yamhill County and the Oregon Health Authority for the financing of community health addiction treatment, recovery and prevention, and problem gambling services in the amount of $3,535,041.44, which is effective January 1, 2022 through December 31st, 2022. And I think that the scope of work is pretty comprehensive. I think we've seen just how vast that work is. So do we have a motion to approve?
Chair, I move that we approve and thank you.
Okay, thank you. Motion to approve, further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And the thanks goes to the folks on the front lines there in that that's some tough work. So appreciate them being there for those in our community that are taking advantage of these services. On to item J2, consideration of approval for the retroactive purchase of 75 Lenovo ThinkPad E14 Gen 2 laptops in the amount of $82,350. Motion to approve?
I'll move approval of item J2.
Motion to approve. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion passes. On to item J3. This is consideration of approval of a notice to intent to award a contract to Columbia River Contractors, Inc. for the Hendricks Road Guardrail Improvement Project in the amount of $32,582.75. Motion to approve?
Chair, I move that we approve.
A motion to approve. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. On to item J4, consideration of the appointment of the following members to the selection committee for the Water and Sewer Infrastructure Competitive Grant Program. A, Steve Caldwell, Pat Evans, Greg Hafner, John Morgan, Elliot Rector, and Ryan Webb. Commissioner Kula, did you want to make comments, or do we want to make further detail on the appointments?
Chair, Carrie, Martin, and Ken reached out and said, who knows who's not, who knows the subject matter but isn't connected to any of these organizations. And so I pulled in the folks that have shared their knowledge in the past, and part of this is the list. And I'm really glad that Greg is on it. Greg, as at Public Works, has been just doing a phenomenal job in so many areas. So I'm appreciative that he's willing to be on this list as well.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. We appreciate that. All right. Do we have a motion to approve item J4?
Chair, I move that we approve item J4.
This is moving us forward ever so slowly, but moving us forward. And I think it bears repeating that ARPA document is 658 pages. And there's some stuff in there that requires that we do due diligence, because otherwise there are some hefty consequences for not following that. So I appreciate the diligence done by our administrator and everybody else who looked at this, because to basically start handing out money would have put us in a really precarious position. But I'm glad to see we're moving forward. So we have a motion to approve. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes. On to item J5, consideration of approval of the amendment number 2 to the contract employee agreement between Yamhill County and Christian Burnish, County Council, per Board Order 18-383 and Board Order 20-.434, retroactive to July 1, 2021. And Christian is very happy to see this on the agenda.
It should be 20-432. There's no
20, okay.
play there. So, but yeah, I appreciate it as the amendment reflects. This would be a change to my employment agreement to reflect the increases that were approved by the budget committee and the board earlier this year. So,
okay, thank you. Do we have a motion to approve?
Chair,
Go ahead. Chair, I move approval of item J5.
Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion passes. And Christian, you can't vote on this one.
I'm staying out, but thank you very much.
No,
And
thank
Chair,
you.
I will say that given how many times I roll by the Fenton House, not during office hours, and I see Christian there, I realize that money cannot replace somebody's time in their life, but I really am grateful for the work that Christian does to just keep us all going on the legal side of things. I have a great deal of reassurance for having him there.
Yes, I don't know that Christian or Ken know what it's like to leave here at 5 o'clock. That's just, it's just not an option. So thank you. We do appreciate the fact that it's 8 o'clock and you're still here. On to item J6, which is consideration of authorizing County Council Christian Burnish to sign the final interstate allocation agreement, participation forms, the distribution agreements, and related documents to include Yamhill County in the proposed national distributor settlement agreement, which is with McKesson Corporation, Cardinal Health Inc., AmerisourceBergen Corporation, and Janssen Settlement Agreement, Johnson & Johnson, settling and releasing all claims against the named parties arising out of the federal multi-district opioid litigation, which has been really ongoing. And Christian, thank you. This seems to have just a life of its own.
Yeah, that was a mouthful, and I apologize for how long that was, but I felt it was important to get some of that information clearly onto the agenda, just as a reminder to the board that there is national federal district court opioid litigation against a number of defendants. This is a proposed settlement between these 3 distributors and this one manufacturer. There may very well be future settlements with other entities, but this is an initial settlement. And the numbers at the national level are pretty well set. $21 billion from the 3 distributors and $5 billion from Johnson & Johnson, for a total about $26 billion. Of that, if Oregon manages to hit all of the benchmarks, and there's a lot of complicated benchmarks built into this settlement, but if we can get all of the eligible counties and cities, along with the state, to sign on to the settlement agreement, the state's allocation of this would be in the range of $320 to $330 million. And what's been heavily negotiated over the last several weeks and months, going back into early parts of this year, in fact, is the intrastate allocation agreement, which is how the state and the local governments allocate that money. And we've settled on a distribution, and none of this is finalized, which is unfortunately why we don't have an agreement that you can take a look at today. But the general parameters of the agreement have not changed in the last several weeks. It's a 55-45% split, 55% of the total state allocation coming to the local governments, 45% going to the states. Of that share, again, if we hit all of the benchmarks and receive the maximum amount available, Yamhill County's share, based on that 55% allocation, could be somewhere in the range of 2.49 million. And I hesitate to even mention numbers because, as I think we've discussed individually, even if 1 or 2 eligible counties or cities decide not to join on, they may represent a very small number of the total population. But the settlement is structured that even if it's 1 or 2 small municipalities, the deduction that we start to see taken from the entire state allocation is significant. So a single city or a couple of cities or a smaller county deciding not to join on could have as much as a 5 to 10% impact or greater, depending on the size of the entity, on the total state allocation. And as you can understand, the defendants are hoping to get as many entities as possible so that they can minimize the likelihood of potential litigation going forward. So we've been working very hard with both the 9 original litigating counties, the other non-litigating cities and counties, to make sure that everyone has as much information as they can. They know where to go onto the website to find their specific registration information. And it looks as though we're going to get very close to, if not hitting that 100% participation mark. The deadline is January 22nd, which is why I'm here today to ask you for authorization to sign these agreements once they're completed, because we have one more session next week. I'm hoping that by this time next week, we will have an agreement, but we'll need to be taking steps to, we've already registered, but registration doesn't actually commit you to joining the settlement. That would only happen once we sign the participation agreements and the distributor agreements. And that will happen once we've finalized the intrastate allocation agreement. Again, any share that the county might receive is paid out over 18 years. There is some front loading to those payments. But again, without 100% participation, the amounts that we might see in those later years is likely to drop significantly. The funds that we receive would be used for approved opioid remediation activities as they're outlined in the national agreement. And the distribution model is purely based on population. So the larger cities, larger counties will therefore receive larger allocations. One of the outstanding issues, and I'll be able to touch on this briefly if the board has more specific questions about the attorney's fees issue, then I would recommend that we go into executive session to talk about that. But generally what I can tell you is when we and the other 9 litigating counties originally signed up with our outside counsel, it's Tom Diamore and Associates, we agreed to a 25% contingency fee agreement. This was back in 2018. The federal district court judge in the national settlement capped all attorneys' fees nationwide if you choose to participate in the settlement at 15%. So our fees were already reduced again immediately by 15% if we join in the settlement, which we're intending to do. Then in addition to that, there is a, I believe, about an $8.8 million attorney's fee amount that is set aside at the national level, which will also go to help pay for Oregon attorney's fee costs. And that is an amount that would be available to attorneys representing all of the entities in Oregon before anything would come out of our individual allocations. And the estimated attorney's fees at this point are somewhere in the range of 12 million. So that additional fund is already going to go to further reduce the amount of attorney's fees that would come out of our allocation. Then in our intrastate allocation agreement, there's something known as a backstop, which allocates an additional $2.5 million that would be shared between the litigating and non-litigating entities. And then there's a small percentage that might actually remain to be paid by the litigating counties directly. So that's kind of a general overview of where we are. There's a couple of issues there that are still being negotiated. But at the end of the day, much of what we would have seen in our 25% contingency fee is being, one, reduced by the national cap at 15, covered by the funds that are set aside at the national level to help pay for attorney's fees, and then also distributed among both the litigating and the non-litigating local entities in Oregon. So it's significantly reduced from what it was originally. But if there are other questions about those details, we will probably need to go into executive session to talk further about that.
Thank you, Christian. I know you've worked hard on this. Commissioners, do you have any questions? Do we need to go into executive session? Any specific questions regarding the attorney's fees?
Chair, I do not.
No. Here.
Yeah, but I appreciate, I personally am disappointed to see the split between the county and the state. And while council did not share your views with me because that isn't permitted, I will say that I expressed that I wanted to see that 85-15. But I appreciate that if we can't get to that at least we're finding some agreement here that's better than what the state proposed.
And that is where we started. And I can speak briefly to the state's allocation. They will be receiving 45%, which they will be putting into different programs, which may very well also find their way back to the county in the form of grants and other funding for other services. So it's not as, we don't know exactly how their how that 45% will be allocated. There's also been some discussion about using it to help fund some of the programs under the Measure 110 scheme as well. So yeah, some of that may make its way back, but yeah, that was ultimately where we ended up with the allocation. But we had tried to make that allocation higher in terms of a direct allocation to the counties, but this is the best we can do.
Didn't happen.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Christian. Do we have a motion to approve item J6?
I move that we approve item J6.
Motion to approve, further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes. The next
Thank
two
you very
items.
much.
Go ahead.
And if anything does materially change, obviously I'll come back before the board and we can have some further discussions about that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A couple of things that I'm asking the board to approve, and this is some public comment having to do with the permanent rulemaking on the indoor mask mandate, and also to submit comments regarding rule changes regarding vaccinations in schools. Now, the comment period for the vaccinations in schools period has closed, but our board didn't meet in time for that. But we do have time, and we did get an extension. We were happy that they were responsive to that. But again, we've got two significant issues here. And when we look at the timing of these and how quickly the public comment closes, especially when you're dealing with public comments on very significant issues that impact people, and you do it around the holidays and you do it with not a whole lot of information out there and input, requests for input, we've really contacted OHA and let them know how we feel. But what I'm asking the board to do is to sign on as a board to a public comment, which would oppose the permanent rulemaking, the proposed rulemaking requiring masking in indoor spaces. And the reason why is outlined in the, hopefully, what we'll approve today, which is a public comment, which we will submit. And what it says is the Board of Commissioners, acting as the governing body of the local public health authority, opposes the adoption of OAR 333-019-1025 regarding proposed permanent rulemaking requiring masking in indoor spaces in Oregon. And the link is there. And it goes on to say, if we approve this, the board opposes this by OHA and instead recommends actions be considered more at the local level, decided at the county level. Goes on to say the board echoes the concerns of Yamhill County residents who shared that the proposed rule would continue to unnecessarily impact citizens forced to wear masks indoors by reducing the intake of oxygen, increasing the risk of bacterial infection, obscuring facial features, impeding normal social interaction, and harming those with past trauma. In addition, the proposed rule contains a heavy-handed threat of a significant fine, and that's $500 per day per violation. I go on to say, further, there are numerous studies which call into question the efficacy of disposable or cloth masks, and I cite a CDC article talking about studies that talk about 14 randomized controlled trials of these measures did not support a substantial effect on transmission of laboratory confirmed influenza. And disposable masks are loose fitting. They were designed to be worn by medical personnel to protect accidental contamination of patient wounds and to protect the wearer against splashes and sprays of bodily fluids. There's limited evidence for their effectiveness in preventing influenza. In addition, I call out the importance of our local employers now being put in the untenable position of playing mask police to their staff and clientele. And then I say, we watch as the do as I do, not as I do as I say, not as I do behavior of Governor Kate Brown and others, and that includes Speaker Kotek, shunning masks for themselves while demanding Oregonians comply with orders which only exist in a handful of states. Now, I did have pictures I was going to bring up, but I think we've all seen the pictures of our governor in a packed ballroom back in Washington, D.C. with nary a mask to be seen. While we also have seen pictures of our school children being forced to eat outside, sitting on buckets 6 feet apart in 40-degree weather and separated in lunchrooms in masks, while the governor and others are shoulder to shoulder without wearing masks. So if wearing masks is going to restrict the transmission of disease, I'm guessing it's going to restrict transmission of disease for our political elites. So I think there's a lot of hypocrisy going on. And I think when you look at the fact that we are only one of a handful of states that are being, asked to do this, I'm asking the board to submit this as public comment as board. Commissioners? Commissioner Kula.
Thank you, Chair. I don't see the permanent masking or the permanent mask rule as necessary, given that there is the emergency powers that can provide that order. However, I do not agree with the full text of this letter, and so I'm going to respectfully decline to sign it. But I appreciate you bringing it forward because I think it's an important discussion to have.
Thank you. And just for my edification, what are some things you don't agree with? Maybe we could make some revisions.
I think that there are enough, both the language of it. I don't feel the need to call out the governor's seeming hypocrisy, as you note hypocrisy in a public comment to the Oregon Health Authority. And so it's really, I don't believe that there is a need for the permanent mask rule. But I don't see that this is the right tool for me personally to express that. Just through this comment.
I appreciate the tone of your comment. Thank you. Commissioner, no, I do. I'm not being sarcastic. I do.
No, and that's why I apologize. I laughed. I appreciate your thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Bershauer, thoughts?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the letter. I will vote to sign it. I think that the most frustrating part for me is that if they truly cared about mask wearing with the intent and purpose to limit spread, then they would dictate what the mask needs to be. Anybody who works in the healthcare field, or, Commissioner Kula, you work in farming, you deal with chemicals, right? There's specific masks that you wear to protect yourself from chemicals, from spread, from other things. And they are not these flimsy cloth masks that are falling down below our noses and, kids are touching all day long. That's just not, it's not useful or efficient or effective. So I think if this was really about reducing spread of a virus, they would be dictating which masks that we are supposed to be wearing, which is not happening. So in my opinion, it's about control. And I think it absolutely is worth calling out the governor's hypocrisy, because it seems to be all too often the case that the folks who implement these measures are the ones who don't see that there's any problem when they don't follow the rules. So I think that it's imperative that we push back and protect our people. So I will vote to sign this letter. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Bershauer, then would you like to make a motion?
Chair, I move approval of item. Are we still on J?
J.
Item J. Step.
Okay, motion to approve. Further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, same sign, please.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes. On to item J8, discussion of proposed rule changes to Oregon Administrative Rule OAR 333-019-0010 and 333-019-1005. And this is, again, another submission of public comment, though the period has closed. I think it's important for us to weigh in as a board. And that has to do with the fact that this is effectively granting unelected members of the Oregon Health Authority the authority to determine if a vaccine, such as the 5 to 11-year-old COVID vaccine, should be added to the list of vaccine requirements. And it allows them to set this arbitrary school exclusion date for which pressures all kids to meet or be excluded. Now, when you look at this, it it does not allow for religious or medical exemptions, and that's in direct violation of Oregon law. Now, we've seen numerous attempts to remove the religious and medical exemptions from the childhood immunization schedule, and those basically shut down the Capitol. We've seen a number of different iterations of that, and people just it was not happening. That was 3063 in 2019, Senate Bill 254 in 2021. All of them failed to do that. What this does is it again gives OHA, basically the authority to go ahead and mandate another vaccine. And this is despite the fact that we're seeing that these in kids are causing myocarditis, other health problems, and we're witnessing, yes, an aggressive campaign to push these experimental products. And now to change the rules to mandate these vaccines. So I'm asking the board to approve this letter, which is a submission to the OHA as a public comment regarding these proposed rule changes. So do we have any discussion? Commissioner Kula?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I don't see, and maybe I'm not seeing it, but if I scroll all the way down to the end of the agenda packet, I don't see a letter.
It's there. There are. Do you not have it in the packet? Have you seen both? Well, these are just.
I just saw the first one. Sorry, the previous item. So okay, well, regardless, I would say in looking through the proposed rulemaking, it wasn't clear to me that that's what it did. And in my, I'm not an attorney and I don't write OARs, but I didn't see that this was mandating a COVID vaccination. So can you point me to exactly where it says that? Because I have it pulled up.
Okay, do you have this? I'm surprised you don't have this proposed rule change in the packet. Does everybody not have it? Okay.
So
Just
I
to-
think there
just-
was, yeah.
Oh, sorry, just to clarify, it's in the packet, it's labeled as J8. It's on page 236. That's specific to OAR 333-019-0010.
Oh, thank you, Ken. I actually thought it was part of the previous letter, so I didn't see a break. Yeah, thank you. Allow me to, I was like, okay, well, we have the first letter, but where's the second one? Okay, thank you. Allow me to scan it more quickly then.
Okay, and I'll kind of give you the bullet points on that. If you look at those two OARs, they're concerning because they would include the definition changes of immunity. So natural immunity, it would not be accepted, and only vaccine-induced immunity would be accepted. Now that is problematic on its face. So there's a redefinition of the word immunity there to only include vaccine-induced. And that then basically says the state can require every school-age child to show proof of vaccine immunity, which creates basically a de facto COVID vaccine mandate because it's not on the required list, but you have to show proof of it in order to have verification of vaccination. So all of those are in these proposed rule changes. And what they're proposing to do is everything those other bills, House Bill 3063, Senate Bill 442, were not able to do. And I think it gives unelected bureaucrats some very significant and troubling authority.
And Chair, I would just say that, again, in reading the proposed rulemaking, I don't see that I don't read it the way that you are telling me it's reading. And so perhaps at this point, I should just find out from other people why there's a discrepancy between how you're reading and how I'm reading it.
Okay, what we did was we basically took each part of the proposed rule change, and based on everything that is in here, all of these are specifically called out in these two rule changes. And that has caused significant concern for parents who don't want to basically be given another vaccine mandate. And again, when you see how short, we asked for an extension because this was something that was we got an extension until the 14th, but this was basically going to be till the end of November for people to comment. So I think that they're very clear in there what they're pointing out, and I think there's no question about the fact that these proposed rule changes are very concerning. So, I mean, we can argue all day long about what it says or what it doesn't, but I think if you read these,
And Chair, I'm reading them and I'm not seeing what you're seeing. If you wanted to walk me through exactly in each, subsection, I'd be happy to do that. I just don't see where it says the thing that you say. And it's not because I'm saying this doesn't say that, it's just that my read of it is apparently different than your read of it. I've had other people reach out to me about this, and I didn't see what they were pointing to.
Mm-hmm. Well, basically, if you read every one of these regarding the vaccination requirements, it is it's all here. I mean, we can spend all day going through this, but I think it's very clearly outlined here. So I'm going to go ahead and ask that we submit this, even though the time period is over, but hopefully they will accept this. So I'm going to move approval of item J8. Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. And I would just suggest, Commissioner, that you take a look at the specifics in here. And
Chair, I will say that for the record, I vote in the negative.
okay.
But I mean, I know you did it, but for the record, but again, I've looked at the testimony that's been submitted by people. I looked at, I scanned your letter. I also read the rules and the changes, and I don't see in it what you are saying is in it. So thank you for that. And maybe this is just a difference. If you have somebody from the OHA on the record saying the things that you have said, then I would feel comfortable signing onto your letter, but I don't have that right now.
So the people from OHA are saying it in the proposed rules, Commissioner, so I don't think we need.
And Chair, that's not what it says. I've read the proposed rules.
It is what it says. Okay. But in any event, my guess is you wouldn't vote in the affirmative anyway, so we could sit here all day long and you can say it doesn't say what it says and I can say it does. But I think that the link there is for people to go ahead and read what these rule changes do, because it's an end run around the legislative process, and it effectively mandates a COVID vaccine. When you take away the natural immunity option and only allow for vaccine verification, vaccine-induced immunity, not good. All right, so I don't want to belabor this. We'll go ahead and we have motion passes. We'll move on to public hearings. We have none. Commissioner Ken.
Sorry, before we move to the next part in the agenda, I emailed the board this morning a request for an add-on, and this is related to a request from Online Northwest regarding an amendment to the CARES Act grant agreement that they were awarded last year. And I just wanted to see if the board would be okay with approving that as an add-on for discussion.
So yes, Christian, do you want to, I thank you for the work you've done on this. Do you want to give us the basic, Ken?
I think I can.
Oh, you want to do that?
And
Okay.
I can defer to Christian. I just wanted to make sure that the board was okay with approving this as an add-on.
Okay, thank you.
So
Yes.
As part of an email, this has been some ongoing discussions that we've had with Online Northwest, and they have some deadlines that they're also trying to adhere to. And so that's the reason for the lateness, because we received the letter and we'll have it added to the packet as well with the request for an amendment to the grant agreement. Online Northwest reached out. They're seeking an amendment to the grant agreement, which essentially modifies the original scope of work and what was approved. And just as a reminder, the previous board order that was approved 20-386 in October of 2020, as part of the budget and the scope of work in the exhibit, they had a proposal that included access and licensing, a middle mile extension for expanding rural broadband, and then there was a last mile extension. As part of that, there was 3 phases that were built into the project to expand rural broadband, and the county approved $500,000 of CARES Act funds. And so this was approved under the last year's CARES Act. And so the grant was approved, Online Northwest was approved the funds. And we already had given them the $500,000, and we already received reimbursement from the state from our CARES Act allocation. Just a reminder on the mechanics was a little bit different than ARPA because CARES Act was fully reimbursable. We had very short timelines in obligating and spending those funds. And so those funds were awarded. We already received reimbursement. So at this point, as part of the packet, there's a letter from Kathy Tate from Online Northwest that is making a request for the amendment, provides an update of what's been accomplished up to this point. But essentially what they're saying is they need to modify the scope of work, because the original project cost was $2 million. This would modify it and bring it down to just over $1 million with the total scope of work, with Online Northwest using the county's $500,000, and then they're also matching that amount, more than that amount of Online Northwest resources to approve it. And essentially, based on the conversations, we asked for, because there's a deadline that the project is supposed to be finished by June of 2022. And what they're proposing is to, at the end of this, they outlined that the grant expenditures to date have been used to add 2 new lease tower sites to the network. And then they provide some details. The first tower is on Ribbon Ridge outside Newburgh. The tower is fully operational, allowing to provide service to 300 to 500 additional households. There's a second tower that's also gone active outside the city of Gaston, or it's soon to go active. The power installation is in progress. Once that's established, that extend service to another 300 to 500 customers in that area, and then also increase capacity to existing customers. They didn't provide numbers for that. The remainder of the grant money, if approved, for spending, again, continuing with the $500,000 that was approved with CARES Act funds, would be construction of a 170-foot tower above Mesera Winery. This is an area that is very underserved in the county and would potentially provide service to another 200 to 300 customers. Let's see, the tower's been constructed, it just hasn't been installed yet. And they're still working with an engineering company to go through the land use process as well. Let's see, the remainder of the grant will be spent on constructing a taller, more permanent tower at their current Sheridan site. And this newer tower will expand coverage potentially for another 200 to 300 households, and then also increase capacity for existing customers in that area. So they have a request to, because one of and the reason it took quite a bit of time is we were really looking at if this were approved, what would be the end product, what would the funds be used for, and what would be that benefit and that what are we funding? You know, what is the county funding? And so Kathy Tate did a really nice job of summarizing all of that. And it's, I emailed it out this morning for you to take a look at. And then there, I believe there's also, as part of that, attached to that is a proposed amendment to the current grant agreement.
So, Chair, I guess my concern is that we have two towers, Ribbon Ridge and Gaston, that apparently are built or constructed, but they're not actually serving anybody yet. And then the third tower, the Macera Winery, I really hesitate for us to even talk about that one because I kind of foresee some land use issues potentially coming, just because that's a pretty sensitive area, and that's a big tower to put in right there. I could be wrong. They could have all of the neighbors on board, but that worries me a little bit because they haven't gone through the permitting process yet, it sounds like. And then, so that one's not even built and not serving anybody. And then the Sheridan Tower obviously isn't built either. So I guess my concern is that the amendment appears to end their obligations after these four are sort of built out, but it doesn't really say anything about they're now serving these 300 to 500 people or customers or whatever. You know, cumulatively, it's probably close to 2,000 people. So maybe I'm reading that wrong, but Christian, you know, we talked about that last, quote unquote, last mile. Are we leaving that out of this? So we're kind of approving the middle mile and then we're leaving the last mile out, because in that case, nobody's being served. We just paid for some very expensive infrastructure.
Yeah, and to clarify, the two towers, Ribbon Ridge and Gaston, I believe are existing towers. They are now leasing some space on some towers that's allowing for that additional expansion. And in Sheridan, I believe there is an existing tower, but this would be a replacement and enlargement of their existing tower. But yeah, if you look back at the board order Ken referenced, our funding was a portion of this larger project, which did include the last mile. But, and Ken, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was always anticipated that once the infrastructure was built, getting the actual customer base and getting folks to sign up was always going to be an additional item that Online Northwest was going to need to pursue. So we were essentially building the toll road, and then the question would be, well, how many folks are we going to be able to get to sign up and pay to use the toll road, basically? So I don't know that part of it really has changed dramatically, but yeah, the amendment would be to clarify and reflect that as far as meeting their obligations under the grant agreement, the county would consider those obligations satisfied if they completed the work that Ken just described. So yeah, it could potentially leave that last mile segment to be completed later, or potentially not at all. What we've heard is that they do intend to continue doing that work, but they wanted to sort of clarify the specific obligations under the grant agreement. So that's why we asked them for some additional information to make sure that, as you suggested, that we're not simply paying for part of the infrastructure that might not, without that final piece, might not actually be able to serve anyone. They clarified that if they were to spend the remaining money, they could potentially serve these additional customers, but yes, they would still need to then go out and market the service and get those customers to sign up.
Commissioner Kula.
Oh, no, Chair, were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say the Macera piece is another question, if we can address that and then move on to your question, Commissioner Kula.
Oh, yeah, and I was going to actually address the Macera, and mostly I say that from the perspective of that the folks who are adjacent to Mesa don't have cell phone service. So I mean, like there's literally dead zones around them. And there's a special spot where there used to be a school as you approach on Masonville Road, where everybody goes to download all their text messages. So I would be surprised if people were opposed to actually having reliable cell phone and internet service in the area.
So and since this is something that is working its way through the land use process, it's probably best that we don't spend too much time getting into the details of that, because it may very well come before the board for consideration at a later point in time. But yes, it is. I think it's fair to acknowledge that there are some steps still in the permitting process around that tower. And Ken, I don't know how this would impact. They've already received the money. If that tower were unable to go forward, I guess what we would likely be doing is then revisiting with Online Northwest whether or not they could effectively repurpose that funding and then use that in a different way that would also hopefully continue to provide expanded rural broadband service in a different way. So I don't know if that addresses your questions about that tower or not, but yeah, it's not built yet.
Commissioner Bershauer?
I guess it just seems like we're kind of stuck, because if we obligate them to finish the whole project with the expectation that they do complete the last mile so that we do have customers who are benefiting from this investment, then chances are pretty good they're just going to return the money because they don't want to be obligated to that. But if we sign this amendment, then, you know, they could proceed with the investment, but we could still have no customers that are actually benefiting. So I guess I'm just sort of feeling a little stuck about this.
Well, let's, Christian, if you wanted to respond to that, if there is a response to that, because those are along the lines of the questions that I had to.
Yeah,
Christian
you'll
as
see
well.
in the letter. In the letter, it does say if the board's original, and this is sort of getting back to why we're looking to clarify. If the board's desire is that they complete the larger project, then what they've said is that they would return the monies that have been given them. So they wouldn't be in a position to be able to commit to the completion of the larger project at this point, and they would return the full grant amount.
Ken, did you want to comment on that? I know one of the things that I was also questioning was, you know, we've got this dollar amount and it's sort of like, here, take this and clean it up for this dollar amount. And what's the verification of whether or not that was an accurate use of the remaining funds? So.
Well, I think, you know, because, you know, as I mentioned before, the $500,000 that was awarded, it was an eligible expense, a category that was under the CARES Act, that it was a grant program for expanding rural broadband, which is, you know, what has been proposed. And I'm trying to think, you know, the question, you know, this amendment would, again, I believe, still stay consistent with the previous. Admittedly, I have to, you know, it's been a year and I'm a little rusty on my CARES Act. I've transitioned to ARPA at this point. But I still think, you know, the project is still looking to, again, expand rural broadband coverage as originally proposed. If the funds were returned, you know, there's a whole other mechanics that I would have to go through, because I anticipate, again, if they don't proceed with the project and they return the $500,000, I have to again revisit the various timelines associated with CARES Act, and these funds would more than likely be returned to DOS at the state, because we were already reimbursed for this. I'm not sure I don't believe it could necessarily be reallocated to other projects. There may be some other CARES Act eligible expenses that occurred during that time period, but I haven't done that analysis to see if there was anything, on how we would handle those funds. If the funds were returned. And, the oversight, because again, this would be an amendment to the grant agreement. So moving forward, we'd still be in the same, if for some reason they're unable to complete the scope of work or complete it within the time frame, or the underlying agreement remains in place, and this would modify the scope of work. And to answer some of the questions that, again, that's why we have the agreements in place to provide the oversight on how the funds are being used, to make sure it's consistent with what has been reported to the state as far as the use of the funds. We would still manage that, and if it looked like it's going through the project that for whatever reason, if it required another amendment, another change of scope of work, or if they were unable to complete the project, we'd be right back here having the same discussion, depending on what they were requesting or moving forward. I think the biggest concern is on the original, even with the original scope of work, is that last mile really relies on customers in the area connecting to the service. Again, like Christian said, the infrastructure's in place, it's available. But again, customers have to sign up and tie into the system for that last mile. So I don't know if I answered your question, because I know there was a lot you were asking about with the CARES Act and the handling of the funds and the agreement. So if I didn't answer it, I'm happy to take another shot at that.
So this project was a $2 million project, right? And so this represents about $1 million. So what am I missing that represents another $1 million investment?
Well, the other part that was included is, like Christian pointed out, there was the last mile, what they call the last mile extension, which was that the customer and the value of what they built. And then there was also, they were built into this was the seeking of additional grant funding. And that's the seeking of the additional funding. They haven't been awarded any other additional grants, whether from the state or federal level.
And the other initial piece was about $350,000 in Spectrum brought licensing that they had also acquired. So that's a portion of that 2 million total as well.
Commissioner Bershauer, does that answer your question? Because I want to, if this.
Sort of. I just, obviously we're concerned about direct access and services to people in our county. So I don't hear a ton of reassurances, but I'm not sure we have a great decision either way. So.
Yeah, Commissioner Bershauer, you sort of encapsulated the question, right? We had this larger project in mind. We're now being presented with this reduced scope of the project, but that was what Ken and I's efforts were getting at, was to try to determine whether or not they could provide additional information to the board so that you would have the information, as much information as we could get from them to help you decide whether or not you still feel that even with this reduced scope, that we are getting enough benefit and sufficient expansion of rural broadband capacity from the continued expenditure of these funds. And that, yeah, it is, those are the questions we've been trying to answer. And if the board would like to hear from Online Northwest, I don't know, Ken, if you think it might be possible for Kathy to come next week and discuss this further with the board. We do still have one meeting before the end of the year. If you'd like to hear directly from Online Northwest, that might be a possibility.
I'm just wondering what would be supplemental to what we've already been told and what you and Ken have already discussed with her, which is what we're now deciding. And,
Yeah,
and I
I'm
think
not sure.
those are questions that are basically, that's the catch-22 here. Commissioner Kula, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. It sounds like, Commissioner Bershauer, your concern is that there aren't any new customers that are being beamed to, right? And that the work may not include new customers as opposed to upgrading the existing speeds of current customers. I do want to note that based upon the presentation and update that we received, oh gosh, I have no idea when that was, where we saw the map and the towers. It'll be noted that the power is on its way to the Mount Richmond Tower or the Gaston Tower. And that's essentially beaming back into an area of Yamhill County that doesn't currently have service. So that represents the last mile as far as I understand the nomenclature. So if we're looking at, is this money going to the two things, which are speed up service for existing customers and expand it to people who don't have any? I'm seeing that the money that has been dedicated and spent is going to that. And so that's why I'm comfortable with an amended scope of work.
Thank you, Commissioner. Christian.
And thank you, Chair. Following up on what Commissioner Coolidge has said, if there's maybe it wasn't explained clearly, and if not, I apologize for that. What they did tell us is that for the additional customers that could be added with the completion of this tower work as described in their letter, Commissioner Coolidge is correct. There is no additional last mile work remaining to reach those potential customers. With this work, they would be ready to sign up to 300 to 500 and 200 to 300 customers in the different areas onto these new towers. So I'm sorry if the impression was that there was still some additional last mile work to be done around these four particular pieces of work, because there isn't. Once these are turned on and operational, they would be, as I understand it, as we've been told, they'd be ready to start signing people up.
Another question, and I think maybe Ken, you answered this, but maybe just a little more edification. They would still be held to the requirements of the original grant, correct? Which means that even though there's an amendment to modify, this amendment would modify the original agreement, they would still be held to the same deliverables as were pointed out and outlined in that contract. No?
No.
No, I mean, in terms of with this notwithstanding, this amendment notwithstanding. So in other words, we're going to include this, modify this amendment. This amendment would modify the agreement, but they are still held to delivering they're still held to delivering this option.
Yes.
So we don't get to, it's not, we're like wiping out any requirements on scope of work or deliverables except to modify it regarding this amendment.
Yes, this is essentially reducing or refining the scope of work. So the deliverables are being modified based on the request. So it's I think it's and it's hard because it doesn't really compare. It's, when you're looking at the two scopes of work and how the budgets were kind of put together, it's a reduced scope of work. So the outcomes are going to be as provided in the letter. And so essentially you would have these 4 completed towers with the additional services being made available.
Right, and yet there's still the consequences, let's say, of not holding to that contract, so that there is that assurance that the county has.
correct.
I don't know, Commissioner Bershauer, if that addresses your concerns, is that there's still got to be some, there has to be some, ability to be able to say, we have to be able to have some kind of consequences in here if the contract can't be fulfilled. Okay, so do we have any other questions? Do we want to make a motion for the amendment to modify the agreement to Online Northwest?
Chair, I don't have the language in front of me. But yeah, I'm fine with doing the amendment.
With the board's permission, I'd be happy to read what a motion could look like.
Yes, thank you, Ken.
The motion would be authorizing the county administrator to sign an amendment to the Yamhill County Rural Broadband Expansion Project Grant Agreement as proposed by Online Northwest.
Thank you. We have a motion. Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Oh, Commissioner
Chair,
Kula.
did we have a motion? Or was it just the motion as presented by,
That was the motion. Ken made
Okay.
the motion.
can Ken make the motion?
He asked,
How about- Chair, I'll just say so moved.
okay, so moved. Okay, so moved. We have a motion. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes. Thank you for that, Ken.
And if I may, Chair, I think this is going to be one, because a lot of the discussions that we're having, because I know we have ARPA funds identified for rural broadband expansion, and we're also working with the state regarding some additional funds to also support projects for rural broadband expansion. And I think I think there's lessons that I know as staff that we're learning through this project as well. And I'm making notes of that, because I know one of the challenging parts is most of the grant funds are going into supporting infrastructure improvement. But again, I think the challenging part is you make the investments in the infrastructure development. Now, whether or not folks are signing up and utilizing the service, I think is going to continue to be kind of the larger question that's going to come into play with all of these projects moving forward. So and as a quick update, I'm still working. I know I've got a voicemail from the state, from DOS, trying to get some clarification around I can't remember the House bill, but the Senator Boquist identified some funds for rural broadband, and I'm trying to get some clarification from the state on next steps for getting access to those funds.
We're kind of in a catch-22 because they're requiring some documentation that we can't provide, and we can't provide it until we know we have the money, and we can't really make any plans because we don't have the money. So anyway, but thank you for working on that. Commissioner Kula.
I was just thinking, Chair, along those lines, I know this is an agenda item, but that I wonder if we at some point could take some of the ARPA dollars that we've set aside for broadband and put them towards a consultant. And I'm sure that they exist that could put together a plan to spend the DOS available money. And I know that's like multiple steps, but I wonder if that's a way to go forward.
Well, we talked about that, and I think Ken said, yeah, it's definitely an allowable use of the money, and that we talked about getting somebody who would be able to contract with us to move this forward, because we certainly don't have the capacity in-house to do it, but yeah.
It's on my list to work on that solicitation.
Right.
Sweet. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so we've got that. And are there any announcements? We have no public hearings.
I think Commissioner Bershauer had one. She was.
Oh, I was. I actually do have an announcement. So I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but the Yamhill County Fair just announced their lineup for next year, and it is the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, Jody Messina, Shenandoah, and Night Ranger for next year. So this is the 168th annual fair. And they did something different this year where they opened the ticket sales up early. And so they're already selling tickets, which is really exciting, but consider that for stocking stuffers. But I grew up on some of those bands. So I'm actually really excited to go. Although Night Rider doesn't really ring a bell for me. I don't remember listening to that one, but
Nitty
very
Gritty
excited.
Dirt Band.
I
Nitty
can
Gritty
date
Dirt
myself.
Band.
Sister Christian. That was the big Night
Yes.
Ranger hit.
Yes, that was, oh boy, what year was that? That would have been
Got to be early mid '80s. It seems high school to
Early.
me. That's yeah.
Yeah,
80s.
Shenandoah was like early 90s, I think.
I
Right.
love that nobody's Googling this right now. This is a moment that's
Christine
rare.
is.
Yeah. So Sister Christian hit the Billboard Hot 100 in 1984.
Was it 1984? Okay,
1984.
So buy your tickets early.
all right. Thank you for that. And just also to let everybody know that we are going to have a special ASA meeting regarding the West Valley Fire District and some of the agreements with the Confederated Tribes and the Sheridan Fire District. And hopefully we'll be able to get some closure to that, and appreciate everybody's work on that. And just been working on a number of different things with regarding youth incarcerated at Oregon Youth Authority and those who are transitioning back into the county, and how Health and Human Services works with Oregon Youth Authority for some of those high-risk kids. So got that going on. And if there's nothing else for the good of the order, Ken?
The other item that for possible discussion next week, and maybe that's during calendaring, with that being the last session of the calendar year, January, I'd like to have a discussion about the January work session schedule, because I know we have a number of topics that have come up in the last couple meetings that I'd like to work on putting together a schedule to make sure that we have folks lined up that are ready to go. And one of those items I'm currently working with the project management team is going to be an update of currently where we're at with the Oracle Cloud project. We're several months into the project at this point, and we thought it'd be worthwhile to come and give a presentation on what's been accomplished at this point, not only for the board, but to also update the public that are viewing the meeting as well, so we can talk about some of the benchmarks and major milestones that we've crossed at this point, knowing that's such a large and significant project that I know most people aren't going to see, because it's an internal system. But again, this is the county's central nervous system when it comes to how we manage funds and a lot of the modules that are built into that. So next week, I know I've taken notes of some work session topics, and kind of hoping that we can get ahead and establish that calendar for January. Adding to that, as always for the new year, is a review of liaison assignments and everything else that the board does at the kicking off a new calendar year. So
Yeah, I was going to mention that, the liaison duty. So if commissioners can be thinking in terms of those assignments, and whether you are interested in changing assignments, or you're okay with the assignments that you've had for the past year, we typically have that discussion early on. And I do want to note that I'm going to add the some of the clarification, or I should say documentation regarding that letter regarding school exclusions for the COVID vaccine for kids, and the changes to the proposed ORSs. So I'm going to be adding those for Carolina to put in the packet. So if anybody has any questions about the concerns regarding the COVID vaccine exclusion for kids in schools, that'll be in there, and it'll be highlighted, so it'll be easy to read. And if there's Commissioner Kula.
Oh yeah, Chair, I just wanted to highlight two things that I'll be putting in the agenda for next week, which is really just a simple letter to AOC expressing interest from folks in the provider community and its cities about the pilot program of staffing and coordination of homeless services. So service agencies and cities expressed cautious interest in that. So I'll be presenting it to you to get your approval before sending it on. And the other one is that I've been having conversations with Grand Ron. They are working on getting their tribal hunting and fishing treaty rights reinstated. And a short bit of history is that when their tribal status was restored, the state of Oregon, as a condition of their restoration, did not permit the reinstatement of their hunting and fishing rights. So they're on a mission right now of reinstating those. And I asked whether a letter of support from their county commissioners would in any way be helpful, and they expressed support for that. So I will have just a short and simple letter in the agenda, in the packet.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. And I appreciate the discussion item regarding the housing services. I know I've reached out to Housing Authority and to YCAP, and there is that, they're very cautious about that, because the thing is that they're being asked to make a decision and to put input onto something we have so little detail on. So I think they are being very cautious. So thank you for that. Okay, if there's nothing else for the good of the order, we'll go ahead and adjourn today's meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.